One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
So welcome back, everybody. We're here with the Inflammation Nation podcast, and I'm very excited today for two reasons. I'm talking to functional nutritionist Risa Groux. She's written a book called Diet as a Four-Letter Word. That's going to be our primary topic today. And also, I'm excited because this is my first podcast interview. It's just been me for the last 8 months speaking in your ear. So welcome, Risa.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yes, it's wonderful. So you have the dubious honor of being the first person other than me to appear on the Inflammation Nation podcast. But before we get to your personal story, because I know that you've got a lot to say about that, can we just start by talking about your background as a functional nutritionist and how that's different than, say, a standard nutritionist somebody might find, or even a dietitian, and how your training and your approach is different, so anybody listening can hold that distinction and understand where it is that you're coming from.
Yeah. So what an honor to be your first guest. Thank you so much. That's great. So I started off always having an interest and passion in nutrition as long as I can remember. Just growing up in a home where my mom was always on a diet and foods were fattening or they were bad or good, and I was very confused as a kid, why are some foods bad and some foods good? And what's this whole diet culture? And she was always trying to lose the same 5-10 pounds. And my grandma was doing the same thing. And, there's a lot of effort about, some foods were demonized and some foods were good. And I was just always so confused. So I had this passion for nutrition pretty much since I was born. And myself, I was also all through high school on a diet all the time because, there was maybe 3 pounds I could have lost and been thinner. So it was a lot of that until you're finally, after college, I think I can't do this anymore, right? You've tried every single diet out there. And so I became a nutritionist, and I was a certified clinical nutritionist. And basically everybody walked in my door, and I would basically put everybody on the same diet type because I felt that was the healthy way to eat. Yeah. And I realized that some people really thrived and some people didn't. And I thought, why is that they're not thriving? Everybody else is thriving. And I realized, it took me quite a bit of time, but I put together my methodology, which is called FoodFrame. Also, the title of my book, FoodFrame, Diet is a Four-Letter Word, is because that is my methodology. I understand that people should be eating according to their current health status. So, for example, if you have blood sugar dysregulation, you'd probably do best on either keto, if you're qualified for that, or paleo program. If you've got IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, or IBD, irritable bowel disease, or SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, you'd probably be best suited for low FODMAP. And so, there's several of those types of things that I realized if we have the person eat according to their current health status, they will thrive. So that's where I created FoodFrame.
Yeah. And, it's funny you say that. And I love that perspective because I don't know how long it was into my own foray into functional medicine that I realized that diet can't be a one size fits all. So you said you do this according to someone's current health status. So do you see this as kind of a flexible model where somebody might change food frames as their health status changes?
Correct, exactly. So depending on what your situation is, and I talk about this in great detail in the book, that perhaps, let's say you're autoimmune, you've got an autoimmune disease, I would recommend AIP, the autoimmune protocol. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I would suggest either a paleo program or a low lectin program.
Sure. Yeah.
Both of those will be very anti-inflammatory and help with that cytokine storm that's created once we have autoimmunity.
Yeah.
So that's where I started getting into functional medicine and thinking, instead of just eat this way, this one size fits all, in addition to your health status, we should be looking at your labs. We should be knowing what you what is your health status, right? Unless you already know it, but we should take a good look and figure out what your health status is.
Yeah, and I think that that perspective of basing diet decisions on your metabolic state is probably one of the main distinctions that you could draw between someone who's trained as a functional nutritionist as opposed to your, and I don't want to say this to disparage anyone, but just kind of like your run-of-the-mill standard training conventional nutritionist or dietitian, which tends to be very much kind of stuck in a box. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. The registered dietitian is typically going on based on whatever the food pyramid is at that time.
Yeah.
And it's, sort of a low fat, low, just a one size fits all. And there really is not a lot of talk about inflammation. Right. There is a lot of talk of blood sugar dysregulation and autoimmunity. So functional nutrition is very similar based on the 4 pillars of functional medicine, that we look at root causes, right? Why is this person having a headache or bloating? And then we're looking at prevention. So our reference ranges are a little bit more narrow, and we consider the body as one whole interconnective unit that everything has to do with each other. And then the 4th pillar is our data. We need to see data. I always say I'm not very good at playing darts in the dark with the lights off. I can't really see the target. I'm going to do some guessing, but I'm probably not going to be as accurate as if I had the lights on and I can actually see where I'm aiming.
Let's talk about that, because that was one of I have 2 quotes that I pulled from your book that I wanted to throw out there and have you just kind of expound on. That was one of them. So why don't we touch on that rather than tabling that and coming back to it? And I totally agree. Like, you'll hear people say, and I've said this myself, we want to test and not guess. Right. So give me your perspective on that whole concept and why it's so important that things are personalized.
I think we're living in a day and age where we have so much information, right? The TV tells you what kind of movies or TV shows you would be liking. The Spotify tells you what kind of music you would like based on your past history. And, I'm hoping that when my grandchildren are born, that they'll take their blood and say, here's your genetic makeup. You have the choice to make a left turn over here instead of going straight, right? We know that our genetics load the gun. And then what pulls the trigger is our lifestyle and our environment, right? That's what pulls the trigger. So if we already know what loads the gun, then we're less likely to go for that, right? We can make choices. But now we're living in a day and age where we don't know. We're still guessing. It's crazy, because in 20, 40 years from now, we're going to be laughing. Our great-grandchildren are going to say, you mean you had no idea you were going to get cancer? That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So we should know. We have the technology and we have the medical advances to know that the genetics load the gun.
Yep.
So I do believe that we should be customizing everything. I mean, I have people who come into my office day after day. My neighbor just lost 42 pounds on keto, but I tried it and I didn't lose anything. Well, of course, my first question is, do you have a gallbladder, right? Do you know if you is your bile sticky and gooey and sludgy, right? Is your GGT tested? I don't ever see that on conventional labs. And then I'm looking at, is your steatocrit on my stool test that I give everybody? I'm looking to see, do you have fat malabsorption? Right. If you have any of those things, keto is not going to be for you. Yeah. I don't have any of those things, and I still could not get into the state of ketosis without exogenous ketones. So
right, exactly. Yeah.
It's not made for everyone.
Yeah, and I love that whole aspect. And this is, of course, one of the cornerstones of root cause medicine, functional medicine. It's all, and Jeff Bland now calls it personalized lifestyle medicine, which that phrase is catching on as well. Talk to me a little bit about functional medicine in general, and the role that you think diet plays in personalized wellness, because I travel around the country and have for 15 years or so teaching functional medicine seminars, and I'm surprised at how many credentialed practitioners doing functional medicine, or maybe learning it for the first time, want to fix everything with supplements, and they really don't emphasize diet all that much. So what's your take on maybe even the centrality of diet and getting that right in the overall functional medicine paradigm?
Yes. And I have to say that I have been a student of yours in your thyroid course, which was amazing. I learned a lot in that course.
Thank you for that.
Ago. Yeah, many years ago. But anyway, what we eat matters. I mean, I cannot emphasize that enough. What we eat matters. And we know that because we all have that day where we've eaten bad food the whole day and we don't feel well. Yep. We don't have our A game. So I don't think this is really a topic of debate, because I think that everybody does realize when we don't eat well, we don't feel well, right? And I have this little saying that I say a lot, and I put it in the book as well, but every new person that I work with, I say this exact thing. I say, imagine that your body is just like a sneaker factory. You've got all the equipment to make a sneaker. I know if I give you leather or rubber or canvas, we're going to get a sneaker at the end, right? It may change in shape or size or color, but it's going to be a sneaker. And if I say to you, I've got this great idea, let's put some cell phone parts in your sneaker factory, what would you say? Right?
I can't make a sneaker out of that.
Exactly. You cannot make a sneaker out of that. And what would happen to that machinery?
Yeah, it would break down.
It would break down. So I use that silly little example because whoever it was that created us, we had some things crawling on the ground and sprouting from the earth that we could actually eat, sustain ourselves, and procreate our two main goals as living organisms. And years later, the Industrial Revolution came, and next thing you know, we have chemicals. Yep. Lots and lots of chemicals. These chemicals are cell phone parts that we're putting into our sneaker factory day in and day out. Now, most of them come from food, but the current number, which I'm sad to report, the FDA has approved 86,000 chemicals for us to use today, well over 3,000 of which we can eat. Most of them aren't even tested. Other countries do not permit half of these. Right. I just got a supplement in my office last week that came in, and there were three dyes and corn oil and soybean oil in this supplement. I mean, it's more inflammatory than it is any benefit that this person, right? And people, it's, they're on every shelf. Yeah. People they're not really trained to look at the ingredients in their supplements.
Yeah. And, to be honest, and there's only, I think, a handful of companies that make pharmaceuticals nutraceuticals for practitioners like you and I that really pay a lot of attention to toxins and contaminants. In California, of course, with Prop 65 leads the way in terms of purity standards. And so the average person who either goes online or talks to a neighbor or even goes to see a specialist, and maybe they go off and they buy supplements online on their own, or they go to their local health food store. What's the risk? Yeah. What's the risk? Or Costco. What's the risk that they're going to be taking something that may have some kind of a metabolic effect that is favorable, but is perhaps counterbalanced by the toxins that are in there because of poor sourcing and manufacturing? Can you speak to that just a little bit?
It's rampant. I mean, people bring part of the first appointment is they bring their supplements into my office, or I look at them online if I'm working with somebody virtually. And, I don't want to put any manufacturers under the bus, but Nature Made is just, it's unconscionable to me. They have soybean oil and corn oil in a lot of their products. Yeah. And those are highly inflammatory oils. Yeah. So, and people are taking these twice a day, 3 times a day, every day for years and years and years. And yeah, it may be a little bit, but that is going to have an accumulative effect. It's causing inflammation. Yeah. So absolutely. It is really important to, yes, you can get absolute cheaper supplements. And a lot of people bring supplements into my office from Costco, and sometimes they're okay, but most of the time they're not. You have to remember these big box stores are really looking for margin. They're not focusing on quality of products. They're looking for margin. So they're looking for cost. They want it. They beat up the manufacturer basically because they want a lower cost to bring to their consumers, which is great. But I wouldn't sacrifice quality for that price. So it's always important to look. And so getting back to what we eat for nutrition is extraordinarily important. I mean, if you're eating a vegetable, let's say, that is GMO, it comes from a GMO soil. We already know that it's depleted of nutrients. Right. We already know that it's an endocrine disruptor, right? That glyphosate that's constantly in your system, right? And then, of course, let's talk about meat that is fed all these cows, let's say, that are eating grains, which they're not really born to eat grains, they're born to eat grass, and they're no longer eating grass, they're eating these grains with GMOs and so on and so forth.
Antibiotics and growth hormones. And exactly.
And so that's what we're eating. And they're drinking water that has also antibiotics in it and a host of other things. And so we are what we eat. And we also are what we absorb. So, but we're eating these foods that are slowly but consistently chipping away at our health. And so it's really, it's a burden on us that we have to look, but it is really important. It's critical that we look at the quality of our food.
Yeah, and something you said reminded me, and I wanted to pull out two quotes. One we've used already, and I have another one that I want to get to. But I remember you saying something about, and you can clean up my paraphrase, something about how our health status is the sum of all the small decisions we make on a daily basis.
Exactly. That's exactly right. It is. It has this cumulative effect. We're already breathing in chemicals. It's in the chairs, it's in the paint, it's in the fabrics, it's in the sheets, it's in the, everywhere we go basically has some kind of treated chemicals. So we're getting it in the sunscreen, we're getting it in the fragrances, in the candles at the restaurant that we're going to. We're constantly bombarded with toxins, and the liver's only going to do so much, right? It's going to say, okay, all these natural things that my sneaker factory is made for, yeah, you guys go here and you're processed, right? But all the foreign invaders, the visitors in the body that are our cell phone parts, it says, hang on a second, when I'm ready, I'm going to convert you into an enzyme so I can process you through the system. Well, it's like giving a huge stack of paper, putting on your desk every day. And once you get through that, you keep doing it every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Your liver's going to finally go, you know what? I'm done. I'm out.
I can't handle the load.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. I'm out. Right. So your body will break down. It's these little assaults that we're doing on the body every time we eat, but every time we breathe and put stuff on our body and our skin, our lotions, all those things are really not helping us.
Yeah. And I think, I just try to put myself in the position of a healthcare consumer, someone who's got some health challenges that are chronic and insidious and maybe getting worse every year. It's really easy to look at one choice they're making on any given day and rationalize going, well, this is just one thing. It's just today. And then all of a sudden, you're 6 months down the road and that has become a habit. And now it's not just one decision. It's a trail of decisions over a long period of time that sums and adds up. Now, I think you and I could probably talk toxins and detox for quite a while, but I know we want to get to the book. We want to talk something about thyroid. So why don't we go through your personal story? Because I think your journey started with being diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And again, you can clean up any errors that I have in my recollection. So tell us about your personal story, and then we'll start going towards the book.
Yeah, so I was newly married. We conceived our first child with absolutely no issues at all. Right off the bat, got pregnant. And so when I was trying for my second child, I thought, no problem, we'll plan it for, this window and we'll be good. And I just couldn't conceive. I could not get pregnant. And then I did a couple of times get pregnant, and I lost the baby right away. So it was a couple of miscarriages in there. And so I started to go to a fertility specialist, and they tested my blood, and the doctor came back and said, oh, you have a hypothyroid. I said, oh, I do, and I was kind of surprised. He said, here, take this. And he hands me a prescription for Synthroid. And I said, well, what do you mean? Like, how long do I take this for? And he said, every day. I said, no. For how long am I supposed to take this for? Until I conceive or, And he said, I don't know, for the rest of your life.
Right.
And I walked out and I thought, why is it that I'm now taking a synthetic medication to make up for something that my body was actually built to produce? Why is he not asking, why am I not producing this? He's just giving me a script. So I started on that trail of, why do I have this underachieving thyroid? I realized that my mom had it and my grandmother had it. And so I kind of went down that road, and I started doing some research about, how can I fix this? And I ended up doing acupuncture, and I changed my diet a bit with my thyroid diagnosis, and I got pregnant, and I had a completely healthy pregnancy and childbirth and everything. And maybe within the year after I had my second child, I went to a naturopath doctor, and they tested me on my thyroid and everything. And and I actually was already back in school to become a nutritionist. And so they told me that I have Hashimoto's. And I said, Hashimoto's, what does this mean? And, what, and then there was a very brief meeting. And then the next patient they basically escorted me out of the office. I'm like, well, what do I do? There was no handout. There was no nothing. There was really, I was not told, and this was a naturopathic doctor. So I didn't know. So I just did a deep dive. What's happening here? And so I did all this research, and I could not find a list of root causes that can cause Hashimoto's. I mean, it literally was nowhere to be found. So I started to create it. And I realized everything I found, it could be Epstein-Barr virus. I tested myself. Sure enough, I had it. I treated that. Could be high levels of mercury or heavy metals. Mine were through the roof. I had eaten tuna fish pretty much my whole life, every day for lunch forever. And then of course, ahi for dinner. And so I had really, really, really high levels. So I did chelation for a year and took care of that and still had Hashimoto. So I went through the whole list and MTHFR. And I mean, I just went through the whole entire list and put it in my book because I feel like it's such a valuable resource that people should know. And I went through that whole list, and I'm now about 10 points away from my reversing Hashimoto's, at least reversing my antibodies. So
sure. Yeah,
which came extraordinary. They were, in the thousands. And so I've done a lot of work for a lot of years to do this. But that is my story. It made me more empathetic for all the thyroid people that come in. And I do a deep dive on people with thyroid all the time. I do all 9 markers of the thyroid for every person who walks in. And we do realize that a lot of medication is not working, and people will just redo that script for 25 years, 30 years, and they don't feel well. And it's because it's more than just your TSH that we're looking for.
Right.
So we need to know if there's a fire going on, if we've got a flame for our T3. But so that's what I did in that was my personal story. And I have now become a autoimmune certified coach because I understand the whole cytokine storm and the Th17 when that gets activated and all that. So, yeah.
It's so funny because you could be the poster child for the typical Hashimoto's autoimmune reactivity case. And just to be clear for people listening, there's, I would imagine that there's a percentage of men and women who get diagnosed with hypothyroidism that get prescribed a synthetic medication that take it, and it really does a lot for them. But that's the exception rather than the rule, at least in my experience. And I would surmise that the difference between people who can take a synthetic medication and do okay probably have less metabolic challenges and obstacles than perhaps you did with the Epstein-Barr infection. And I believe in your story in the book, you talk about, finding things on gut testing, like stool testing, and you mentioned heavy metals. And this is something that I see with my one-on-one coaching all the time, is the complexity in every year that goes by that you don't find those root causes and start dealing with them, your case gets more complicated and more interconnected in kind of a negative way, where you might have one problem and then another one pops up and then the third one makes the first one worse. And now you've got this interconnected, tangled mess of metabolic derangement that sometimes it takes, what some people use the term like metabolic detectives to get in there and start sorting out, because it's not easy in some cases to figure this out, even when you're well trained, let alone if you're just someone who's trying to do it yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not benefit to do it yourself programs. Clearly you started searching before you had all the knowledge and expertise you have today.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And so you accomplished a lot through that self-study. I know we want to get to your more recent thyroid course. We'll come back to that. You've had some success with some high profile people. Like you talk about working with one of the first Biggest Losers in your book. You talk about, I think it was Freddie Couples, PGA star. There are so many diet books out there. And I want to talk about the diet book just a little bit, and then we'll go into your transition in the thyroid course. Like how is your diet book and approach different than any other book that's out on the shelf? I know we've talked about food frames. So you can talk about that in more detail. I know you've got a quiz on your website, which I actually took this morning, by the way.
Great.
Yeah, so just kind of talk a little bit about some of the differences. If somebody wanted to buy and read your book, or go to your website and take the quiz to see which food frame would be appropriate for them, what's the advantage? Why is this different?
Because each diet book that comes out, and diet philosophy, or I should say eating lifestyle philosophy, is wonderful. There's usually backed up by lots of science and studies and great knowledge and clinical studies. However, it's great for a group of people that it fits for.
Yeah.
But there's lots of people who do it and say that just didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And of course it didn't work for you, because if you have SIBO and you're on, the vegan diet and you're eating all these grains and legumes, you are going to feel horrible.
Right.
You're going to bloat. You're going to continue your chronic diarrhea or your chronic constipation. That is not a good fit for you. So, as I mentioned earlier, we all should be customized to what our health status is. So it isn't a one size fits all, and it's time. It's time. We're in 2022. It's time to do. We have this information. We know that we have diabetes, or we know that we have SIBO, or we know that we have autoimmune. And I can't tell you how many people walk into my office, if they're lucky enough to have been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease after, the average person goes to 6 health practitioners before they're finally diagnosed. But if they do walk in with an autoimmune disease, then then I say, what did the doctor say? Did they tell you to change your diet? Oh no, they didn't mention anything. I'm thinking, how is this possible, right? How are cardiologists giving statins without CoQ10?
Yeah.
How are autoimmune patients not being told to stay away from inflammatory foods?
Exactly.
You are you've been building these antibodies for so long, and of course they're going to find a gland, a tissue, an organ to park their cells, right? And it's not just this one, because if you don't fix that dam that's open, that leaky gut, then of course you're going to get another one. We collect them. So, my experience is once they get 4, then they're pretty debilitated. It really affects their life. But people get them. I mean, people walk around with 2 of them, or they walk around with 1 and they don't even know they have a second.
Yeah, they don't know about the other ones.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. So you have to get to the root cause unless you want to be sick.
Yeah.
But,
it sounds that our approaches are quite similar. I have a process that I bring my clients through called, finding your ideal diet, or discovering your personal food code, and play around with different ways to communicate the same thing. And quite often I find that in most cases, a paleo diet, a well-constructed paleo diet, because you can do it poorly, is a good starting place, but there quite often have to be some modifications, as you talk about, and you define those as different food frames. And I tell people, listen, this is just our starting point. We will figure out, as we start getting specialty tests back, as we start to see how you're responding to the diet changes that you're implementing, we will tweak and modify this, and your ending diet might not be the same as your starting point. And it sounds like you have very much the same perspective.
Exactly. You're always tweaking. I mean, I'm working with a rheumatoid arthritis patient right now. We got her from major inflammation down to pretty much nothing. And then it started to creep back a little bit. And so I started to go through everything. Her diet was pretty good. She did have a little bit of gluten knowingly, and we took care of that. It was a few weeks, but then it came down, and I said, what oils are you using when you're cooking at home? And she said, we only use olive oil. I said, at high heat on the stove? And she said, yes. And I said, bingo. I said, change that to avocado oil or coconut oil and see what happens. And sure enough, the next time I spoke to her, she goes, I can't believe it. And it's not that that olive oil is the demon, but it is an inflammatory food if it's at high heat.
Right.
And I just have to touch on, because it's so relevant to your listeners that are interested in inflammation, the story of Freddie Couples, one of our greatest golfers of all time, came and he wanted to lose 20 pounds before the Masters. I said, no problem. Forget about this. Easy. Tell me about the back pain, the chronic back pain that you have been famous for your whole career. He's like, he goes through this whole story. We talked maybe half an hour. He's telling me then this and then this. And I said, where are the surgeries? He said, I never had a surgery. I said, you've never had a surgery. So I said, has anybody ever checked you for inflammation? He goes, I don't know. I said, well, I'm going to order some tests. He goes, order whatever you need. Now he had traveled with his physical therapist. He had a doctor all over the world. He had doctors everywhere. He was always chronically in pain. His number was a 7 or an 8 out of 10 every single solitary day. And he had a lot of smell sensitivities. He had headaches. Now he lives on 2 golf courses. Both of his homes are on golf courses, and he works on golf courses, right?
I think I know where this is going. Go ahead.
Right. Exactly. So what are golf courses treated with?
Yeah.
Chemicals, right?
Yeah.
Oh, he's just breathing them in day and all night, all day, every day. And so we detoxed him. And sure enough, that very first week after he was on my detox, I said, Freddie, what's your number? He said he was a 4. Yeah. And then every week I've ever seen him ever since, he's always a 0 or a 1. Yeah. And it was such a great story for him because it was nothing really structural. I mean, he's swung that golf club thousands of times, millions of times, but it wasn't actually a structural thing. It was an inflammation problem. Yeah. And once we took care of the inflammation, it was good to go.
Yeah.
He lost that 20 pounds.
Yeah. I just got back from a camping trip. We were out for a week with my 84-year-old dad.
Oh, wow.
And one of my nephews was with us, and he asked me, he said, Uncle Steve, your background as a chiropractor. So he asked me about this recurrent sacroiliac joint pain, lower back pain that he had. And he said, every time I go to my chiropractor, he adjusts it and it keeps coming back. And I said, well, one of 2 things is going on. You've either got some motor compensations that are promoting that abnormal biomechanics, or you're probably chronically inflamed. And until you deal with that inflammation, this is just a red flag. It's not the problem. You think it is because that's where the pain is coming from. The problem is your inflammatory diet and lifestyle. And he got it. He's like, okay, I'm starting to understand. Yeah. And that story plays out in practices like yours and mine all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just a note on weight loss and inflammation, because it's so frustrating when people want to lose weight. There's 5 reasons typically why we don't lose weight. But the major underlying reason why a lot of people could be eating well, exercising, their thyroid's good, their everything's balanced, their hormones are balanced, their cortisol is balanced, but they are holding on to the resources because we have a fire in the basement. Yeah. And once we have this fire in the basement, it's like having somebody on the 2nd floor saying, hey, can you help me change the light bulb? And you're like, what? You want me to change the light bulb? I'm waiting for the fire department. I'm like putting all this, getting the hoses out. And once we get that inflammation down, then the body says, I don't need these resources anymore. I'm good to let them go. But when you're in the state of crisis, your body's inflamed, it's holding on to everything it's got to possibly have because it doesn't know if it needs it. So it's really important. People get really frustrated, and I've seen it so many times that once we get that inflammation out, whether it's you're filled with parasites or pathogens, or it's whatever else it is, it could be your nephew that has this inflammation, we're not going to release those resources.
And I'm glad you said that, because you spoke to mechanisms, and especially now with the abundance of research and the number of people, even lay people, who are going online and trying to find research about controlling inflammation. They come up with articles or even podcasts, YouTube videos about supplements like turmeric or resveratrol, or the role of glutathione, or any number of other well-known, well-researched anti-inflammatories. And they take it and they feel better for a while, then they stop, and then the pain comes back because the inflammation was never addressed at that root cause level. Mm-hmm. Now, let me transition, because you talked about weight loss, and this is the other quote that I wanted to talk about in your book. You said losing weight is a side effect of wellness. I thought that was so well put. So let's talk about that.
That's one of my favorite lines.
Me too.
Because I tell everybody I work with, and it is a side effect of wellness. I don't care if you're skinny in the coffin. I'd rather you not be in the coffin, right? Yeah. So it's not about, how we look. It's about I care more about the numbers on the labs than I care about the numbers on the scale. Yeah. So if you want to diet and get skinny, sure, I can get you there, but that's not going to help you, right? It's what you need are the numbers for longevity and quality of life and lack of inflammation and homeostasis, right? We want the body in a state of balance. So to me, that's worth everything. Now, again, if we have that fire put out, if we have homeostasis, then the body's going to say, hey, I don't need this extra weight. Let's just get rid of it. Right. So it's a side effect. It literally is a side effect of wellness.
Yeah. And even all the things, and you only gave just a very short list, whether it's parasites or thyroid issues, all of those have one thing in common. That's the inflammatory cascade, which has predictable impacts on your ability to break down body fat and then use that as a fuel source. Fascinating stuff. So let's talk about the thyroid course. You mentioned when we were chatting before we hit the record button, you said that you're coming out with a brand new thyroid course, and I'm assuming it's a do-it-yourself course that's available on your website. So let's talk about who that's for, what it does for people. Just kind of map that out for us and for the listeners.
Sure. Through my personal journey and working with thousands of people in thyroid and taking classes like yours in thyroid, I really have gained just a tremendous amount of knowledge about thyroid health. And so I felt like I had all this information, and people really struggle with thyroid.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, our allopathic conventional medicine paradigm is not very helpful. And people really, really struggle. And I get that. I struggle too, until you find the right way to eat and the right way to live, and the right medication for you and supplementation. So I'm really proud of this course. It's called Achieving Optimal Thyroid Health. And I put everything I know into it. And so I've focused on hypo and hyper, Graves and Hashimoto's, thyroidectomy, and I talk about what to eat, what not to eat. I talk about supplementation, what to take, what not to take. I talk about toxins and how they affect thyroid. And I really go through the mechanisms of how the thyroid works, because people really don't know. And when I work with people, I do an hour-long appointment when I get their labs, because I want them to know, not just hand them a piece of paper and say, this is fine, you're good. Well, what about that thing flagged? You're good, it's fine. Right? So that's the way we get in allopathic medicine. So I don't want to do that. I empower every person I work with to know. You should know what your thyroid's doing. You should know why it's low or why it's high, or how to adjust that, or what's important. Are your hormones affecting your thyroid? Is your cortisol, is your inflammation affecting your thyroid? So I look at it very with a wide net. And I get in the course, I put it all out there. It's a do-it-yourself on your own time, and very accessible information, and very easy. And
so it sounds like it's not just informative and educational, but there's the practical steps, like things that people can actually do, right? Because
we look at labs.
There's tons of information products out there, but then the application is missing. And so people are better informed, but they're no better off.
Exactly.
Because there's, how do you actually apply this? And is this, what kind of format? Is this audio only? Is it video? Do you have handouts?
It's video and audio. There are handouts. I give you the list of root causes. I give you food sheets, logs of foods, what to eat, what not to eat, tons of handouts and information. And practical information that these are the resources, these are the labs, these are what you look for, so on and so forth. We talk about gut health and how that affects it. We talk about toxins and how it affects it. It's a really comprehensive course that I'm really proud of. And I just want people to have the tools to help themselves that I didn't have, right?
Yeah, just to get the shortcuts. And I always, because there's so many information products out there these days, from not just practitioners, but even lay people who have their own story, who cobbled together some kind of approach, and now they're selling that out there. You've been endorsed by some pretty heavy hitters in our industry, right? If we just look at the book that we were talking about earlier about the FoodFrames, you've got endorsements from Josh Axe and Stephen Gundry, the lectin guy, and Suzannae Somers. So is that the sphere that you've operated in, and you know all these people, and they're looking at your work, oh man, she's like spot on?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of support. I mean, Josh Axe has been amazing to me, and he's really been very helpful. And all of them have really been supportive in my work, and they get it. They get that this is the way to go, that there are root causes, and not everybody should be vegan, and not everybody should be keto, or certain different diet types. So I think that they've really supported me in this, and they believe in it.
Yeah.
So it's been great.
It's so needed. So last question, and then we'll talk about where people can find you. Like, what is the one piece of advice that you could give anyone, whether it's seeking their ideal diet or the food frame that would work for them, or whether it's in the world of thyroid? What's the one piece of advice you would give to somebody who's part of this inflammation nation, and they're wondering what their next step is? Like, what's your advice and guidance for them?
Get your labs done. Look and see, turn on the lights, find the target. So get your full labs done for your thyroid, and see if there's any metabolic issues with blood sugar dysregulation. What is your inflammation? What are your white blood cells look like? How's your kidney? All those things. Take a deep dive in your blood, and then take a deep dive into your stool, because I have people that I'm working with that, I can give you thousands of examples where they are just riddled with candida or H. pylori or pathogens. There's some parasites that can lead to Hashimoto's, and there's tons of pathogens that lead to different autoimmune diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, colitis. We can go on and on and on. It's not just a pill to manage it, right? And watch the slow decline. It's not this IV treatment that you're getting for Crohn's disease that's going to keep you alive. It might manage it for a little bit, but I wouldn't recommend eating gluten and having those infusions, but they do. So it depends. If you really want to reverse your health and optimize your health, then you have to find out what the landscape looks like. So you got to get that blueprint first. So that's what I really recommend. And the second thing I would recommend is look at what is going into the body. Look at your shampoos, your conditioners, your toothpaste, your water, your supplements, your food. Look at what you're putting into your body. Is this good enough, right? When we go to different countries, they have so many, this is new information. Just a few weeks ago, we did some research, and the EU, Europe, had banned over 1,300 chemicals for their cosmetic industry. The US at the same time banned 11. We banned 11. They banned 1,300. So you're thinking, we permit so much. We have to be our own advocates. Our government is not watching out for us. So go eat and live with your eyes open.
I think it's a surprise for people to learn that toxins can get absorbed through your skin. I don't think they think that. They certainly can understand I can breathe in something or I can consume it, through my GI tract, but, thinking, well, maybe I should not use these toxic household cleaners, or maybe I need to opt for a cleaner line of personal cosmetics. And I know that the statistic, but we're in the state now where babies are being born with upwards of 280 or so chemicals in their umbilical blood.
Exactly.
We're born toxic. We don't become toxic. We're born that way. And that's just so critical and so crucial.
It is. It's mind-boggling that we have so many chemicals, that brand new babies are already toxic once they're born. It's criminal what is happening. So be your own advocate and decrease your toxic load.
Absolutely. All right. So as we close, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on risagrouxnutrition.com.
Let's spell that out.
Yes, it's RISA, and the last name is Groux, GROUX, like X-ray, nutrition.com. And there you can find my book. You can find my course, my product line with my detox and all my other highly good quality supplements, and then lots of recipes for sure. You can take the FoodFrame quiz there as well, and see a bunch of testimonials, including Freddie Couples. And my book is also available at Target and Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and Instagram and TikTok now, and all those places at Risa Groux Nutrition.
Awesome. And I'll put a link in the episode description as well. This has been fantastic. I really, really, truly appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad. It was great to be here. And I'm just, again, so honored to be your first guest.
Yes. Yeah. This one's going to go down in the history books.
Yeah.
All right, Risa, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Inflammation Nation. If you found this episode valuable, please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Be the first to know when a new episode drops so that you can stay on top of your game. It also helps others like you find the answers they need. And why not head over to my main website, drnoseworthy.com, that's drnoseworthy.com, to explore my personalized functional medicine coaching programs, submit a question to the podcast, maybe take a quiz, or even reach out to me using the contact form that you can find there. We'll see you next time.